Chapter 3. So with Chapter 3, we have the very aptly named Three's Company. As we just left off in the last chapter, it's Gandalf and Frodo hanging out in Bag End with the new addition of Sam also being there. And they have just decided that they were going to go on this journey, and Sam was going to join Frodo. Unlike the movie, they don't go immediately, because Gandalf here says you have to go quietly, you have to go soon, but don't vanish or disappear. So Frodo decides that it would be best to go in the autumn for his and Bilbo's birthday is when he'd leave, and by that time he'd make some arrangements for what to do when he leaves. So Frodo at this point is showing some hesitancy for wanting to leave the Shire. He's obviously wanted to leave, but he decides that at this point he's not going to just up and vanish. So he needs a plan for what he's going to do to not draw suspicion. And so he needs to find a place to tell people that he is going. But Gandalf, of course, says, don't tell them that you're leaving the Shire, just tell them that you're going somewhere else. Frodo's always often actually been thinking of leaving Bag End for the last little while, but he wants to know where he's actually supposed to go for himself. And he makes a comment about Bilbo's journey. Said Bilbo went there to find a treasure, whereas I'm going to lose one and not return as far as I can see. So again, Frodo asks the clarifying question, where am I to go? And Gandalf, of course, tells him, make for Rivendell. Don't go all the way toward Mordor, just make for Rivendell. And of course, Frodo's very excited by this. He's never been, but he's heard tell of it by Bilbo many times, and he's excited to take Sam to finally go see the elves he's always wanted to see. So we get a fast forward here. We have a summer evening, and we are right back to where we had been in the previous two chapters. We are back at the Ivy Bush and the Green Dragon, where the talk of the town is what is going on with Frodo Baggins. He is leaving, but why is he leaving? The main prevailing rumor at this point, that is also supported by Frodo himself giving nods to it, is that Frodo is running out of money, and that the seemingly immeasurable wealth of the Bagginses of Bag End had come to an end. And toward the end of the month, everybody knows now that Frodo Baggins was going back to Buckland. He told everybody that yes, he's moving back this autumn, and that Mary Brandybuck was looking out for a very nice place for him. In truth, though, Mary and Frodo had already found a place called Crick Hollow near the edge of Buckleberry. And to everybody but Sam, he pretended as if he was going there to settle down permanently. So Gandalf stayed for another 2 months and left at the end of June, and he told Frodo he would only be gone for a short while, and that he had heard something that had distressed him and wanted to look into it himself. He said there's just a matter that needs looking into, and that if he hears anything on the road that distresses him, he will send for Frodo immediately to leave. And at this moment, he also reminds Frodo, do not use the ring. And then he went off. I may be back any day, he said. At the very least, I shall come back for the farewell party. I think after you all may need some company on the road. So the day arrives on the 22nd of September. Everybody is getting ready to pack everything up in Frodo's house and to make the journey on to Buckland. This point, though, Gandalf is still a no-show. He hasn't shown up, and Frodo's getting kind of anxious looking out for him while they're all doing their little party. As they prepare for the party, they were all going through Frodo's stuff, putting everything away. They made sure not to leave any of the wine for the Saxville Bagginses, which is who Frodo was selling Bag End to, for not a bad price either. And while they were drinking, Frodo was wondering how he's going to break it to his friends that he is leaving the Shire for good. They went on drinking and singing songs and just generally enjoying their time, but by the end of the party, Gandalf had still not shown up. So Merry, the next morning, all of them start getting everything together. They start putting everything in the wagons, getting ready to go to Frodo's new place in Crick's Hollow. And Fatty Bulger and Merry are both going onto the wagon, and they're going to prepare Frodo's house for him. Frodo, on the other hand, is going with Sam and Pippin, and they are going to walk the whole way to the Buckleberry Ferry, and then take the ferry over into Bucklebury. Frodo makes a joke that he's going to get into training and how he has gotten fat and will lose some weight in doing so. So Lotho and Lobelia Saxel Baggins show up. Lotho is Lobelia's son, to look at Bag End to make sure that everything that they bought was still there, because they're just grimy, scummy people like that. And they say, "Mine at last," but it's not quite, and they are surely corrected on that. They, after looking around, finally leave with the spare key and are told that the actual key is with the Gamgees on down Bagshot Row. And Lobelia kind of snorts and thinks that the Gamgees will come and take everything out of the house while she's gone in that day. So Sam is going with them, and the reasoning that they had for that is Sam is going to do for Mr. Frodo, is the verbiage that's used, meaning that Sam is essentially going to be Frodo's manservant along the journey, and that's how everything's going to go. They have their last meal, a small little dinner in Bag End, and they made sure to leave all the dirty plates and everything else just laying around for Lobelia to wash up the next day. So night's growing, and they decide they're going to start their walk soon. And as they are waiting for Sam to finish saying goodbye to the beer barrels inside, Frodo overhears a conversation. One voice was the old gaffer's, and the other was a strange, somehow unpleasant voice. He could not make out what the other voice was saying, but he could hear what the gaffer's was saying, and it seemed that the gaffer was very upset. "No, Mr. Baggins has gone away. Went this morning. And my son Sam went with him. Anyway, all of his stuff went. Yes, sold out and gone, I tell ye. Why? Why's none of my business, or yours. Where to? That ain't no secret. He moved to Bucklebury, or some other such place, away down yonder. Yes, it is a tidy way. I've never been so far myself. They're queer folk live in Buckland. No, I can't give no message. Good night to you." That is the one side of the conversation. Frodo, of course, is glad that the other voice did not decide to come up the hill to ask himself where he is. He was getting tired of hearing, or he was getting tired of everybody being in on his business and trying to figure out everything that he's doing. So at this time, Sam was done kissing the beer barrel goodbye, and he comes out, and they tell him to lock up and then go take the key down to his dad and come back and meet them down the road. At this time, they are waiting down at the bottom of the hill by the gate when Sam comes popping by. Sam is wearing a shapeless felt bag that he calls a hat, which I find interesting that they didn't have Sam wear a hat in the movie. I feel like it would be more comic if he did, so I'm okay with them choosing not to have him wear a hat. And in doing so, they're all joking around. Frodo says, "Well, I'm sure you all gave me the heaviest stuff." And Sam says, "Well, I'll take your stuff if you're there's still room in my bag if it's too heavy." And Pippin tells Sam, "No, stop it, he's too fat. He needs to work off some of his weight." And Frodo's joking and says, "Sam, I'm sure you're carrying enough. Come on, let's go." It's funny to listen to their little jabs at each other. I believe Professor Olsen from Signum University in his series, they call that hobbitry, making fun of each other and light jabs. So engaging in a bit of hobbitry at the moment. So they end up walking all night. Nothing out of the ordinary happens. They stop, have some supper, they keep walking a little bit, and they put quite a few miles between them and Bag End at this point. and they decide that they're going to snuggle up and go to bed. They don't set a watch. Frodo feels like they're in the Shire, everything's safe, there's no reason to worry, so let's just all go to bed. And as they go to bed, a little fox comes up and sees them. We get one paragraph from a fox POV, which I find interesting. We rarely ever get like actual POVs from Tolkien, so I find it very fun that a fox is given a POV at this point. The fox says, "Hobbits," he thought. "Well, what next? I have heard of strange doings in these lands, but I have seldom heard of hobbits sleeping outdoors under a tree, 3 of them. There's something mighty queer behind this." He was quite right, but never found out any more about it. Poor fox. So the lot wake up the next morning. They go. Sam goes to start a fire. They all go get some water and bathe in the river. I think it's interesting that they all decide to bathe even though they're out camping. Either way, they all go and have breakfast that Sam makes for them, pack everything up, and they start their journey once again. And Pippin makes a remark saying that the road goes on forever. And as they continue talking, Frodo goes into a song. And this song is, again, like I stated in the first chapter when we first heard this type of song, this is going to be a recapitulation of that song from Bilbo when he set out. But it's going to have a significant change that I believe gives us an insight into the mind of Frodo at the time. And just for that, I'm also going to pull up Bilbo's poem as well, just so we can compare them side by side. So Frodo's poem goes, "The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither when I cannot say." And we'll compare that to Bilbo's. "The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither when I cannot say." Weary versus eager. I believe that gives us a good insight into each hobbit's journey that they are departing on at this point, and what the outcome of said journey is meant to be. Frodo's clearly not as excited to be leaving the Shire as Bilbo was. And Pippin here points out rightly that sounds like some of Bilbo's old rhyming, but also says it does not sound altogether encouraging. Frodo says it just came to him, and he was making it up, but it feels like he had heard it long ago. We here also get the imagery of the road being like a great river, and every doorstep is a spring that is a tributary to that river. And we have the famous quote, "It's dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door," he used to say. "You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to." So they continued on the road for a while. Nothing much is happening, and they hadn't really seen much traffic at all. There was really nobody out on the road. Eventually, though, they hear what sounds like pony hooves coming up on the road behind them. Sam wonders if this sound is Gandalf. And there was a feeling inside Frodo that he thought, maybe, even if this is Gandalf, it may be best if we just get off the road. I'm tired of everybody looking into what I'm doing and wondering where I'm going, so let's just get off the road and we'll hide. And you know what? If it's Gandalf, we'll jump out and we'll give him a scare for making us wait for so long and making us worry with him not showing up. So they all get off the road and get into a little hiding. And for those who are familiar with the movies, this is going to sound familiar to you. What's happening? A rider shows up, and this is clearly no hobbit pony. It's a pitch black horse with a dark rider on the top. And he is sniffing. He's trying to find something, some elusive scent. Frodo, seeing this rider, begins to be scared. And his mind immediately jumps to his ring. And he thinks about putting it on. And he does a sort of justification with the ring. And this is something that we'll see with the ring often when we have any real talk about it. Frodo says, well, we're still in the Shire. Okay, Gandalf's advice is absurd. There's no reason for me to be worried. I'll just put the ring on. So he reaches his hand up and he touches the ring. And as soon as he touches the ring, the rider sniffs, sits straight up, and spurs the horse along forward. So the horse begins slowly, but then begins to trot and goes and picks up speed. And it carries on down the road past the hobbits. But Frodo thinks when he sees it almost dwindle in the distance, it turns off the road and into the same side of the woods as they are. So Frodo thinks obviously that's weird, and Pippin's wondering why a big person is in this part of the world messing around with the Shire folk. And we get our first mention of trouble in the South Farthing with big people. Frodo brings it up. He says there are big people here in some parts of the Shire. The people in the South Farthing are having trouble with big people. That'll be important later on. But Sam says that he can tell them where this rider came from. He came from Hobbiton. And it's here that Sam relates that when he brought the key to his father told him that there was a man in black who was questioning him. And Frodo realizes, well, I had overheard this conversation, but I hadn't heard the other end. Sam says that his dad said that he was a big folk, but he talked funny, like a foreigner from foreign parts. And Sam didn't think much of this because, well, they were in a hurry, and he wouldn't have thought that there would be any relation to what they were doing on their mission and what this person was looking for. And he apologizes to Frodo for not bringing it up earlier, and he hopes that his dad didn't do any harm. And Frodo said, it can't be helped, it's all good, don't worry about it. And Pippin says that there still may be no connection between that big person and this big person. They may just, be two separate people, and this may be a coincidence. And Sam says, what was the smelling about, though? Frodo mentions that he wishes Gandalf were here, and Pippin asks, do you know who this rider was, what it might be wanting? And Frodo says, I don't know, and I would really rather not guess. And Pippin does the all right, keep your secrets meme, and he says, all right, cousin Frodo, you can keep your secrets for the present if you want to be mysterious. I think that's funny that they reuse that line and give it to Frodo, and now it's become such a very popular meme. They decided they're not going to stick too much to the road. They're going to try to stay in the woods, try to stay hidden, and they find a row of trees that lead their way to Woodhall, which is... Woodhall is a city in the Shire. Woodhall is not the name for the place that we are going to go here in a second. Woodhall may have been named after the place that we are going here in a second, but the place we are going is not called Woodhall. Woodhall is a city in the Shire. It's a very common confusion, so I feel it important or necessary, maybe just important, to point out. But of course, if you call this place Woodhall, fans of the book are going to understand what you're talking about, because it's the only time in the book that we're ever near Woodhall. So the hobbits decide they're going to wait until night before they start walking again. Hopefully they don't run into anybody else while they're out that way. So they kind of hide in these clump of trees, and once twilight begins, they walk out onto the road, and they start walking. And the stars grew brighter as they kept going, and it kind of gave them courage and hope. So much courage and hope that they decide they are going to start humming. And they start humming this supper song, and this song comes to mind that Bilbo had written the words to, but the tune is as old as the hills, it says. So here's the song. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof where there is a bed, but not yet weary are our feet, still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower, leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or secret gate, and though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way and take the hidden path that runs toward the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut and slow, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, fare you well, fare you well. And then this last stanza of the poem, or of the song that they're singing, is what is used in Pippin's song in the third movie. The instance of which is used is significantly different. This is a happy, ready for supper song, and Pippin's song is a sad song that we listen to while a man eats a cherry tomato in the most disgusting way possible. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread. Through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then world behind and home ahead, we'll wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, all shall fade, all shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. Significantly different from the song that Pippin is singing in the movie. But at the end of the song, Pippin shouts, "And now to bed, and now to bed." But Frodo shouts, "Hush! I think I hear hooves again." They decide to run off the road and go hide in the bushes. But they say not too far. Frodo wanted to see that it was another Black Rider. He wanted to make sure. And Pippin teases him here to don't forget the sniffing. As they are hiding, though, they see the shade of a black horse approach with a black figure leading it. And the black figure comes up to the spot where they had just left the road and begins sniffing and swaying right at that spot. As it's swaying and sniffing, it then lowers itself to the ground and begins to start crawling. And it starts crawling toward directly where the hobbits are. And Frodo begins to feel such fear, worse than it was last time, that he immediately grabs for the ring around his neck. But he's saved by clear voices ringing out at this point in song. And with the song, the shadow stands up, jumps on the horse, and immediately rides in the opposite direction. These clear voices that they hear, of course, are elves singing. And Sam immediately knows this and shouts, "Elves! Elves, sir!" We have the elves, sir, that we had in the last chapter. Frodo mentions that the shadow had gone away immediately as it heard the elves, but the other two aren't quite as concerned with the shadow anymore now that they know the elves are nearby, and they can hear it sing. Frodo understands a little bit of Elvish, but the others know nothing, but the sound of the song kind of just weaves a picture into their mind. So here's the poem. Look at this, guys. We got 2 poems in 1 chapter. I don't think it gets any better than that. And they're not even that far apart from each other. They are a page between them. Snow White, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. Glithoniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes and bright thy breath. Snow White, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. O star that in the sunless years with shining hand by her were sown, in windy fields now bright and clear, we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth, Lithoniel, we still remember, we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas. Glythoniel, or Elbereth, is a goddess, or not a goddess, a Valar in Tolkien's mythology. I guess the best way to describe them would be the pantheistic idea of like a goddess, or think of them as angels, as like cherubim and seraphim in like the highest order of angelic beings, with Eru Ilúvatar being God himself, and you have these Valar who are his highest realm of angels. And then you can think of beings that are Maiars, such as the wizards, or Sauron himself, or the Balrog. Those are all Maiar, and you can think of them as like lower level angels, like archangels and things like that. But yeah, the fun mixture of medieval theology and Tolkien's legendarium. So Frodo realizes that they're singing about Elbereth, so he automatically knows that these are high elves specifically, not the woodland elves of Mirkwood, for example. These are Noldor. So the hobbits kind of jump out, and they're like, hey, we're here. And they are immediately greeted by the elves. Hail, Frodo, he cried. You are abroad late, or are you perhaps lost? Then he called aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered around. Frodo asks if he can join them. He says, hey, we are kind of going the same way, so let's go. And they say, well, we don't want to go with hobbits. They're kind of boring and dumb. And they ask, how do you even know if we're going the same way? And Frodo goes, how do you know my name? And we get introduced to the first elf. His name is Gildor and Glorian. And he is of the house of Finrod, where if you know more about Tolkien's Legendarium, that would mean more to you. Finrod was a very famous elf back in the Dizzy, but he now resides with Elrond in Rivendell. Pippin then does a little faux pas. It's important to remember that Pippin is not yet 33, so he is technically still a minor according to hobbits, but of course he is still the same age he is, so it would be inappropriate to assume that Pippin is as mature as a 16-year-old, because that's not quite true. Just because a society deems somebody of age at a later age doesn't mean that they have a different level of thinking at younger ages. But he is not quite as couth or familiar with speaking with elves as Frodo is. So he jumps out immediately and says, "Oh, wise people, tell us about the Black Riders." They say, "Black Riders?" They said in low voices. "Why do you ask about Black Riders?" "Because 2 Black Riders have overtaken us today. One has done so twice," says Pippin. "Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew near." It's at this point that the elves kind of change their mind, and they're like, "Well, we can't really tell you about that here, so you guys are going to need to follow us, and you're going to need to stay with us." And Pippin is obviously happy with this. Sam remains speechless, and Frodo says, "Thank you indeed, Gildor and Glorian. Ella sila lumen omentielvo. A star shines on the hour of our meeting," he added in the high elven speech. And Gildor kind of takes this as, "Oh no, we can't talk about these guys in our language because they know it. Hey guys, don't use racist language around these guys because then they'll know," stuff like that. I don't know, I find it funny. So the elves lead the hobbits down this road, and they go up to the top of this hill where they have a sort of meeting place that is under open sky, but on 3 sides all around. The wood is very thick, and it sort of makes a sort of wall to this open area. And on the eastern side of this enclosed space is a cliff where the tops of the trees below just meet the edge of the cliff, and above is open sky. And with that, we get a list of Tolkien's versions of actual constellations and stars, which I always find very interesting. High in the east swung Remirath, the netted stars, and slowly above the mists rose red Borgil, glowing like a jewel on fire. There was the swordsman of the sky, Menelgavor, with his shining belt. That one should be pretty obvious. And with that, the elves burst into song, and fire sprang up with a red light under the trees. So part of the confusion with the Woodhall thing is this area of tree-lined opening space with the roofless area is called the Hall multiple times by Tolkien himself. Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered. There is a fire in the hall and food for hungry guests, said the elves standing before him. So the elves refer to this as a hall, which I believe is what leads to the confusion between Woodhall, the city, and this being called Woodhall. Which Woodhall may be named after this because it is a wooded hall. I don't know, but that's the differentiation between the two. So we get a nice long description of the food that they are serving here. The elves call it poor fare, but clearly all the hobbits love it. Sam says the best he could do is say that if he could grow apples like that, then he'd call himself a gardener. But then he says that it was the music that went to his heart, if you know what I mean. So they all sat around drinking and eating the entire time, and Pippin then began to feel sleepy, and so the elves took him, and he went to sleep in a nice little bed-ish area by himself. Sam was also tired, but he refused to leave Frodo, so he decided to curl up at Frodo's feet while Frodo stayed up and spoke with the elves all night. He knew a little bit of Elvish, so he was able to communicate with them a bit, and they called him a jewel among hobbits. And Frodo continued on in conversation with these elves. Frodo's first question to Gildor is, has he seen Bilbo? And Gildor answers, yes, he's seen him twice. And he said farewell to them where they currently are, where they're sitting. And he said he'd seen him once again since then, but said no more about Bilbo. Gildor kind of picks up what Frodo's really feeling. He says, you're not really asking me any of the questions you want to actually ask me. And so he speaks outright. He says, you're leaving the Shire, and you don't know if you're ever going to come back. That's the problem, right? And Frodo, of course, says, yeah, that's my issue I'm currently having. That's what's on my mind. But he says, I thought I was doing a pretty good job at keeping my secret, though. I kind of feel bad that you know. And Gildor assures him, don't worry, the enemy won't find out your secret from us. But then that kind of scares Frodo even more, because he's like, how did you know I was keeping the secret from the enemy? And he goes, you know why I'm leaving the Shire then, right? And Gildor says, no, I don't know why the enemy is coming after you. But I do know that he is. I perceive that he is. It's obvious with you being followed by these riders. And Frodo's like, these riders are servants of the enemy then? They are? And Gildor says, has Gandalf not told you anything about them? And Frodo says, about them? No. And then Gildor says, well, then I'm not going to either. It seems like that's best. He said, it's best I don't tell you, because if I did, you might be too afraid to continue on your journey. So Frodo obviously thinks, well, now I'm terrified. I don't know what you could possibly tell me that would make me less scared, or that would make me more scared than I'm feeling right now with you telling me this. Frodo says, I don't know what I'm to keep doing. I don't want to keep getting followed my entire way out of the Shire. But Gildor says, I think you should follow your plan the way that you have been, and if you still have any issues, I believe that you should ask Gandalf. So Frodo says, we've been trying. asked Gandalf. He was supposed to be here the other day, but he hasn't been. We don't know where he is, and that's another reason why I'm anxious right now. And Gildor stops for a second and goes, well, I'm not liking this news at all. He says that Gandalf being late does not bode well. But it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. And he says to Frodo, the choice is yours. Go or wait. And Frodo says to Gildor, and it's also said, answered Frodo, go not to the elves for counsel, for they will both say yes and no. To which Gildor replies, elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. So Gildor says, all right, do you want actual advice? I'll give you actual advice. My advice is to go as soon as possible, and if Gandalf isn't there when it's time for you to leave, don't go alone. Take as many people as you can, as many who are willing. And Frodo says, will you tell me what these riders are, though, in case Gandalf doesn't show up? That way I just know what they are. And Gildor replies to him, is it not enough to know that they're servants of the enemy? Flee them. Stay away from them. Make sure they don't come near you. Why do you need to know exactly what they are? Just know that they're bad. Frodo asks, where is he going to find courage then? And Gildor tells him, courage comes from many places. Be of good hope. The wandering companies of elves shall be told of your journey, and they shall be aware, and will help you. And with that, he does what is an incredibly important thing that is very much so glossed over, not even mentioned in the movie, but glossed over regularly in the book as something that this is more than just saying what it's saying. This is essentially a ceremony that forever changes the person to whom it's done. Frodo is named Elf Friend. This isn't saying you are just a friend of the elves. No, this is a title. Frodo is given the title of Elf Friend. I believe one thing that I would like to read after these on this channel would be The Smith of Wootton Major, where you can understand what Tolkien means by elf friend. Smith of Wootton Major is another story by J.R.R. Tolkien. And you'll see that elf friend is a title. Elf friend changes the person who possesses that title. Not just like in a metaphorical sense, but physically and spiritually and emotionally, this person is changed forever as elf friend. It says right here, the wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those who have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you elf friend, and may the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom have we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear words of the ancient speech from the lips of a wanderer in the world. Frodo has been so outstanding to them as a non-elf that they have decided we are going to bestow the title of Elf Friend onto you. In the last paragraph, Frodo felt sleep coming upon him, even as Gildor finished speaking. I will sleep now, he said, and the elf led him to a bower beside Pippin, and he threw himself upon a bed and fell at once into dreamless slumber. That's chapter 3. Again, I hope you guys are enjoying the series. I'm really enjoying reading through it in this way. I find it very fun, and I'm very excited for the future books that we'll be getting into. I plan on trying to pop through as many of these every night that I can read multiple chapters a night. I'm going to. I plan on trying to release these more regularly. Next week, I'm going to be in another country, so I won't really be able to do anything then. So I'm going to try to get as many out this week as I can. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying what I'm doing, and I will see you soon.